It's harvest season here on the homestead, and today we are going to be making a delicious fermented green bean recipe that you guys are going to love, and best of all, it's super fast and incredibly easy. Hey you guys, it's Carolyn from Homesteading Family, and it happens every single year. A hard freeze threatens the garden, which means that we're bringing in a lot of produce all at once, which means that I'm preserving a lot of produce all at once. And in days like this, fermenting becomes my absolute best friend because fermenting vegetables is super fast. It's incredibly delicious, it's really easy, and it actually stores for a really long time really well. So today we're going to be doing a fermented pizza bean recipe. Now these are purple green beans. Now the term green in green beans comes from the term immature. It doesn't actually refer to the color, so you can have purple green beans. And the recipe we're using today is based off of a recipe from this book, Traditionally Fermented Foods. If you have not gotten this book yet and you are interested in fermenting, I highly recommend it. I will put the link in the description for you guys. Now, you're gonna be amazed at how incredibly fast this is, and it only requires a few ingredients. But I wanna say right up at the beginning that your fermenting container really matters. Now this is just a jar. You could also use a crock, like this crock right back here. But if you are just going to ferment and put this in your refrigerator after it's fermented, or you're gonna eat it within the next several weeks, then just a good clean on this jar with hot soapy water is fine. If, on the other hand, you are looking for a long-term preservation method, something that will sit on your pantry shelf for months, you really need to sterilize this for at least 12 minutes in boiling water before you start. That's going to make all the difference in the world for your finished product and the way that that sits for a long time. Now, I don't know if you can see it right now, but I'll grab it real fast. I've had a lot of questions about this, and this is actually an experiment running right now. These are purple carrots that I fermented last year. They have been sitting on the counter this entire year. I started with a sterilized jar, and these things are still great. They're still good to eat. The flavor is getting definitely a little pungent, and they're starting to get a little softer, but these are over 12 months old and have just been sitting out on the counter with fermentation. So you can definitely use fermenting as a long-term preservation method. I'm gonna see how long those continue to be good for. All right, so our project today is so easy. You're gonna take about a teaspoon of dried oregano. If you have fresh oregano in the garden, you can definitely use that. You'd probably wanna use closer to a tablespoon. Okay, and then you're gonna take some garlic. Now in her recipe, she calls for one small clove of garlic. That just does not seem like enough to me ever. So I have 2 large cloves of garlic here. And now I'm gonna pack my green beans into here. They have been snapped, rinsed if necessary. And I'm gonna fill this quart-size jar up about a third of the way right now. Okay, now I've got 2 small tomatoes that have been diced. And I'm just going to sprinkle them in a little layer. We're going to kind of keep doing this until this jar is mostly full, not all the way full. A little bit of green beans, pack them in there. And you can pack them in pretty hard. You want to fill up that space. When they sit in the salt brine during the fermentation, they're going to lose a little bit of volume. They're going to shrink down a little bit. So it is fine to really give them a good squish. Okay, a little more tomato. Do you see how fast this is coming together? This is why I just love this. I feel like I get good food on the shelf really quickly. Okay, now I really want to end with the green beans so I don't have little particles of tomato floating to the top. And you want to fill to about there. You need a little room for your weight and your brine. Pack it in real well. Okay, now we are doing a lacto ferment, which means that all of the lactobacillus bacteria that we need for this ferment is on your vegetable already. So it's really important to think about the quality of your vegetable. Please, if you can, use organic, so there's nothing been sprayed on here to sterilize or kill all the lactobacillus bacteria. You also don't want anything that's going to hinder its reproduction in the jar. The same thing is true of the salt. Do not use an iodized salt. Iodine, yes, it is important for our health, but iodine is a natural antibiotic. That's why they put it in wounds. So you don't want to put that into a jar where you're trying to grow bacteria. That would not work. So we have about 2 tablespoons of really good quality salt here. Today I'm using a Redmond's real salt. You could use a Himalayan salt. You could use any good salt that is not a table salt. That means that it's going to have different chemicals in it when it's called a table salt. It's also not an iodized salt. And we're just going to sprinkle that over the top. I mean, look at that. We didn't even make a brine. That's how easy this is. This is the shortcut method. Now we're going to take good quality water. And again, your water matters. You don't want treated water. You don't want anything with chlorine in it when you are fermenting, because the chlorine is meant to kill bacteria. We don't want to do that. So if you need to, go get some distilled water, but please don't use your regular city tap water that's been treated. And we are just going to fill this right on up. I'm going to fill it up right to the neck of this jar, the big ring. Okay. Now, here I have a fermenting weight. This is a really handy thing to have if you're going to do a lot of fermenting, and I really love these. I love the kind that have these indents where you can actually hold onto them and they're not just slippery discs. This is made just for this wide mouth jar. I'm going to try and find a link for these for you guys and put them in the description because I really love these. Now, the important part of fermenting is to keep everything under the brine. That way, so you're always under the liquid level. That way you don't have anything poking out of the top that would mold. So these weights do that. You just put them in and they're just gonna push everything right on down and keep it all underneath that liquid level. So it's really handy to have. Okay, now as we start to ferment, this is going to create some gases, which means it's going to kind of look carbonated. You'll start seeing some bubbles come up. And you don't want those gases to build up. I'm not going to be using an airlock here. I don't think that they're necessary for vegetables as long as you're keeping everything underneath that liquid level. But what I am going to do is use this 2-part lid. The reason for this is that I can put this on very loosely, screw the band on loosely, and that will allow it to self-burp. So it'll allow when those gases build up, it'll pick up that flat lid just enough to go ahead and remove the gas and not let it build up, but it will settle back down into its spot so that it's not allowing other agents in there, like yeast spores or mold spores. That's really important for this. If you don't want to use a 2-part lid, you could use an airlock. You could also use just a regular lid, and you could just open it once a day for the first 2 weeks when it's going to be producing a lot of gas and burp it. Now, this is going to sit with this loosened lid for 2 weeks at room temperature. After we get to those 2 weeks at room temperature, we're going to tighten the lid down and move it to cold storage. Now, that can be your refrigerator, but it also can be a cold space in your home. A pantry shelf, a space in the basement, somewhere that stays cold. Ideally, and again, this is ideally, it would be less than 55 degrees. However, down here, it's a lot more than 55 degrees. And again, you can see that these have sat on the shelf just fine for a year. They still taste good even. So at that 2-week mark, you can eat them and you just serve them as a side dish like you would any pickle. They're absolutely delicious. They're fast, they're easy, and look, we're done. That's it. We're just gonna let them sit out and do their thing for 2 weeks, and then they're gonna be on our shelf or wherever we need some fresh vegetables ready for us. Take care, you guys. Enjoy. Goodbye.